Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm very pleased to have in the studio with me here the Executive Director of Americans United.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
Thank you.
Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the Reverend Barry W. Lynn. The website is au.org, as in Americans United, and you can tweet him at Barry W. Lynn, L-Y-N-N, and or at Americans United. And Reverend Lynn, welcome to the program.
It's very nice to be back here.
It is an honor and a pleasure to have you always on the program, and the door is always open to you.
Thank you.
So you have a story about Jeff Sessions in your own personal life. You want to share that with us?
I do have a story. Jeff Sessions was not someone that I wanted to see confirmed. In 1999, when he was merely a senator, had been in the Senate 2 years, he decided that we should be considered for prosecution, we being myself and Americans United for Separation of Church and State, for intimidating voters. What kind of voters? Christian voters, because we sent at that time 75,000 letters out in the election cycle, just reminding people that there is a law in the books that says you cannot, if you're any kind of a charity, including a church, you can't endorse or oppose candidates for public office. And then it's suggested, because I'm also an attorney, that if people have a question, they shouldn't just rely on our letter. They should seek their own counsel, but that this was a serious statute. He refers this letter, sends it to Janet Reno. Janet Reno thinks about it for a while and decides that the statute has nothing to do with the free speech of stating to churches what the law is. So she dismissed it and said it was not relevant. Now, unfortunately, Senator Sessions is his own attorney general. He is the attorney general, and I'm curious whether he's planning to consider a reinvestigation of this matter.
And of your organization.
And of our organization. And we have in the past, we've been subpoenaed by congressional committees. We've followed those subpoenas. Nothing has ever come of it. We try to be purer than Caesar's wife, because we do complain when organizations violate the laws. We are kind of an equal employment nudge. We don't just complain about Republican churches that are endorsing candidates. We do the same thing for Democratic churches. One of my favorite stories, one campaign in which Pat Buchanan, a man I used to do radio with, Pat, and then the head of the DNC and the head of the RNC, they all called me to complain about somebody else's illegal campaign practices. And I was able to say in each case, we're aware of it, and we've already sent a letter to the Internal Revenue Service asking them to investigate. You know, we don't have any investigative power, but the IRS does. And unfortunately, because of a highly technical decision about 6 years ago, they've been foreclosed at the IRS from investigating even the most egregious examples of endorsement or opposition statements about candidates.
Well, in fact, my understanding is that some years ago, we talked about it on this program, there was a movement among right-wing churches, mostly the mega churches,
right,
to explicitly endorse candidates from the pulpit and endorse political positions, and then even send the tapes of that to the IRS as a way of saying, in your face, buddy. And whatever happened with that?
Well, the group's the Alliance Defending Freedom. That's what it's called now. It's out in Arizona. Yeah, I know. Well, freedom these days has such a broad meaning, and usually it means just doing whatever right-wingers want to do.
Or corporations.
Or corporations. Or corporate right-wingers.
Right.
No, nothing has come of it because of this bizarre requirement set by a judge to change a single sentence of a tax regulation. They have foreclosed from investigating. Lois Lerner, who the late person who investigated these things for all nonprofits and who got in a lot of
she
trouble.
No longer works there. She's still alive.
She is. She was basically fired by this ridiculous investigation of another range of tax-exempt organizations, where the Drudge Report and Fox News, why she's delaying giving C4s, these social welfare organizations, tax exemption because she doesn't like them, because she has some kind of intense interest.
This was the allegation.
This was the allegation. Not proven, zero evidence, completely clear, but they ruined her life. Now, I never knew her personally, but she was the person I sent all of these letters of complaints. We filed about 125 complaints over the last 20 years. In the beginning, they used to be taken seriously. A church in upstate New York that took out a $40,000 ad in USA Today telling you not to vote for Bill Clinton and said, send money to the church. Whoa, yes. That was a shocking little thing. I was just coming to Washington at the time. I'd been living in New Hampshire for a couple of years. My wife saw that ad over breakfast, and she said, is this legal? And I looked, and I dropped this, the oatmeal, and I said, no, it's not. So we started something called Project Fair Play. The idea was, if you're going to be consistent with the law, then everybody has to do it. Now, there might be some of your listeners who say, well, wait a minute, what about Jesse Jackson? He endorses candidates. Or what about Martin Luther King? Well, John Lewis, Congressman Lewis, told me that, in fact, Martin Luther King never, ever endorsed a candidate from any pulpit, from any religious institution. And he didn't, even though he spoke in those places almost every day of his professional life.
Yeah, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed.
That's correct.
And in fact, the Republicans have tried to claim that he's a Republican, but he actually gave no indication of even a partisan inclination, much less a specific candidate.
No, he wasn't. And then the second one that was former Congressman Floyd Flake, who was a Democrat, African-American, very prominent pastor in New York. And he, for one reason or another, decided to invite Al Gore to a Sunday service, and then handed Al Gore a sports jacket, and the sports jacket said President Gore on the back. Mm-hmm. That was not right, so we did complain about that. And the IRS did investigate that. They did have, you have the right in the IRS to just get somebody to sign a letter that says, we did something wrong, we're not going to do it again. And that's what he did. And I've been on radio shows with Floyd Flake a number of times. After that, he says, I know it was wrong. I knew it when I was doing it, but I just did it.
So right now, if churches break this IRS law, all they have to do is issue a written mea culpa?
Oh, no, they don't have to do anything, because they can't even be told that they're under investigation than to produce any materials. Why? Because of that one sentence.
What's the sentence?
The sentence is the description of, not the specific name, but the description of the entity who can sign off on these investigations of churches. It's very difficult to do that because of something called the Church Audit Procedures Act. And in the old days, there were different geographical divisions. There'd be the Southwest Division, the Northeast
of the IRS.
Yeah, but then they changed that in the late 90s. And as a consequence, a judge noting this said, you have to clean this up. You have to change the regulation. You have to describe people in a different way, because they did away with these geographical determinations. And so 6 years ago that happened. The Obama administration began rulemaking. This is not difficult. Rulemaking on environmental issues, you can have a gazillion feet of stuff. But on this, it's one sentence. There's that old story about monkeys. If you put an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of typewriters, eventually they'll print out all of the works of Shakespeare. I think you could do this with like 5 monkeys, maybe. A couple of them could be stuffed. One sentence. They'd have not only done that, we'd be halfway through Romeo and Juliet by now. But they didn't do it. They dug their heels in. There was a lot of comments about this on both sides, but the administration of the last president simply didn't act on them. And that's a big problem.
So the consequence of that is that right now, both right-wing and left-wing churches can functionally, even though it's not technically legal, technically, I should extract that word. It's not legal, period.
That's right.
That's
right.
But nonetheless, they can and they do endorse candidates and political positions with impunity.
Yeah, and you know, you can do the political position thing. I mean, one of the things that the right-wingers who want to get rid of this, and Trump seems to want people to believe, is that you can't talk about any issue. You can't say, be pro-choice. You can't say, be anti-abortion. You can't say, but you can say all those things. The only thing you can't do is endorse or oppose a candidate for public office. And when we complain, we don't complain about vague statements. We complain about things that are so over the top. For example, there was a preacher who was telling people for 2 weeks before the election some years ago, if you need a ride to get to the polling place, just come to the church parking lot and we will take you there. And then when you got to the church parking lot on election day, there was a guy in the bus who said, hey, who are you going to vote for? And if you gave the wrong answer, in that case, anybody but the Republican, you didn't get on the bus. Not
really?
Even. No, I mean these aren't even close to the wire.
I remember in the 2000 and the 2004 elections, right-wing churches passing out voter guides.
Yeah, well, we complained about a lot of voter guides, and the good news is a lot of churches realize that they're so they're just inherently deceptive. And the Christian Coalition voter guides were a total fraud. They would change from congressional district to congressional district based on how bad they could make the Democrat look. And they were distributed by the tens of thousands. And a lot of ministers, and this is the good news, have just said, look, these things are poison. We're not going to distribute them anymore. So it doesn't matter whether they're prosecuted or not. They've already given up that idea.
Right. My wife and I started a community for abused kids in New Hampshire back in '78, and which was a 501c3.
Sure.
In fact, I wrote the application for nonprofit status. I learned a lot about nonprofit law. And my understanding was that it's not just churches, but any 501c3, any nonprofit organization, including schools, programs for abused kids, fill in the blank. None of them can endorse candidates for political office.
That's correct.
And here you have, and there's a lot of 501c3s that are seemingly benign or whatever. Here you have Trump saying he wants to repeal the Johnson Amendment, which is what basically said if you're running a 501c3, a nonprofit, you cannot campaign or endorse a candidate. If he does away with the Johnson Amendment, does that liberate essentially nonprofits to endorse candidates right across the board, or does it only apply to churches?
That's a good point, because when the Congress got first interested in this, Walter Jones from North Carolina only wanted to free the churches. Later, I think he's reintroduced this bill. He wants it to apply to everyone. Frankly, a lot of us who run nonprofits, we don't want politicians to come and say, hey, I know you're collecting money for abused children, but you think you could give me a campaign contribution because maybe I could help you sometime. We don't want to do that.
Or the other way around. Let me donate $20,000 to your charity.
Of course.
Hey, would you like to endorse me?
Exactly. Or how about this? Let's just run like money laundering. Let's say you want to give money.
The Koch brothers give money to my charity. My charity then endorses the Republicans.
It's a perfect. Talk about, campaign finance reform, unfortunately, has not gotten us very far. You open the doors for churches and charities to give virtually unlimited amounts of money. You have just blown a gigantic new hole in the wall of serious campaign finance. And unlike your charity and mine, which is also a 501c3, the churches don't have to file any documents with the IRS disclosing where the money comes from, where the money goes, because they're already exempted from that law, as well as hundreds of other laws that affect the other charities that are not religious.
Amazing. There's a bunch of other stuff here I want to do a deep dive on. Stick around.